Hello, everybody, and welcome to the UK release event for Rhythm of War. I am Daniel Greene, and I am going to be joined here today by Brandon Sanderson to have a fantastic discussion about the book's release, the writing process, and various Cosmere things. And I'm very excited to get to that. And I believe now we're going to welcome in the man himself, Brandon Sanderson. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
It's been a lovely day here in Virginia. How about over there across the country?
It is a little bit dreary, to be honest, but one of the very few non-sunny days out here in Utah. But that is just fine because I'm inside.
Well, the book has now been out in the US and is being released in the UK. How's it been going so far on your end, seeing fans get their hands on it finally?
It's so far so good, right? There's several huge Reddit threads talking about the book, and I am carefully not butting into those discussions and just kind of watching them from afar and things like that. But it's kind of interesting because normally you would have me bleary-eyed today because in the States where I'm, it's 12:30. And normally I would have been up, till like 6 a.m. signing books. But with the digital event, I went to bed right on time. So everything's nice and happy over here.
And I know you still are getting a ton of signing, though, done, correct? How many more pages do you have in front of you for the foreseeable future?
Oh, man, I just went down and re-signed a big stack of like 100 books for people whose shipped books got damaged from US release parties, and so we are shipping them replacements. So all of those just got signed.
I love the commitment, though. That's great to see the people follow through. They still get the new signed copy. That's spectacular. We had a lot of questions already coming into the Q&A. I just want to say for the people here for the event, you can ask questions. The Q&A will be getting to those, but I had some sent in beforehand. If you wouldn't mind, we can go ahead and jump on into. The first of which is a bit of a meta question, but I'd love to get to it here. So this is, hold up here. Oh man, I lost my questions. Hold up, so sorry. So there is a huge culture around asking questions about the books and trying to tease out details from you. Are there things we as fans can do to make the near constant grilling bearable?
Well, this is something I inherited from Wheel of Time fandom. There are a couple things I inherited, one of which is the very detail-oriented questions. People got very used to asking me those during the Wheel of Time days. And indeed, I was part of that fandom, the Wheel of Time fandom, before I became published and things like that. So I just rolled with it. I'm very, very used to it. It does get a little hard. Where it gets the hardest is when it's rapid fire. And when I don't have time to prepare for it, like getting those questions when I'm doing a book signing. I've been at it for 5 hours, and then one comes across someone who really wants their question answered. I totally want to talk to them about it, and I try, and my brain is like pudding by then. And so I usually just completely flub the question. But we do occasionally like spoilerific, Q&A sessions and stuff where I'm ready for it, where I'm prepared and I'm ready to go. It's not as bad as I make it sound. Sometimes I think they're one of the reasons, like, I don't like to do it as part of AMAs very often, because in those I try to get to all the questions, right? And so if you have 400 questions to answer and I'm going to spend a week, dedicating hours to doing this, when I get to the one where someone has 6 questions in one and subsections to each of them, they're very detail oriented, that basically I'd have to write like 2 pages to answer these questions. It's very hard for me at that point to get to those. So basically, this is more on my end than it's yours. The fans shouldn't have to worry about this. They hopefully will accept my explanations when I say this is not a spoilerific thing like today's is not. And then when it is spoilerific, they should feel free to ask the questions. They shouldn't worry about, my brain being pudding. I should just be able to put restrictions ahead of time when I know it's going to be difficult. So the answer to you, fan, is no, you shouldn't have to worry about that. You should be able to ask the question you want as long as it's the right forum for asking it. And it's on me to make sure that I create those forums.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So we have the whole gambit of Cosmere, if that's okay, not specifically Stormlight, but one that I find a bit of an interesting Cosmere questions. Can shard blades, dead or alive, be used as humalurgic spikes? And if attempted, what would the result be?
So this is, technically, yes, but in practicality, no. So I'm going to give you an in practicality, no. So to use something as a hemalurgic spike, it basically just needs to be able to already have a charge of investiture or be able to adopt one, right? Technically, shard blades are made from a god metal. You could do this, but the blade is going to be big and unwieldy, and the form it's in right now is not going to, it's going to slice the soul rather than rip pieces off. You would have to jump through a bunch of hoops that wouldn't be worth it in order to use one. So it would basically mean that you'd have to separate the metal of the shard blade from the concept of a shard blade itself, is what's going on there. So, yeah.
Interesting idea, not practical. Seems to be the rough answer.
Yep.
So getting more towards specifically Stormlight Archive, the development of cultures here has been something that, not getting into spoilers, but is definitely prevalent in Oathbringer and Rhythm of War. How have you developed all these kingdoms throughout Roshar and the Parshendi? What does the process of cultural development look like for you there?
It's very different for different stories, different cultures, how much I expect the culture to be on stage. Right? Like, for instance, the Iriali. I will usually, with these are the culture that the people who believe in the one, where, we're using some pantheism and things like that, and where, I will usually pick a few broad stroke cultural guidelines, and those broad strokes can either be things from our world that I'm separating from, a real world inspiration, or they can be just a fantastical inspiration of some sort. And I'll paint with very broad strokes for those cultures. They'll almost become World of Hats cultures. Do you know that trope? This is the trope that, at least this is the way that they describe it on like TV tropes, I think. It's the idea that when Kirk and Spock would visit a planet in original Star Trek, that planet would have like one defining attribute, right? It's the same trope as in planets in Star Wars. You'll go to a planet, they have one ecosystem or one biome, right? You basically have to, if you're not doing a lot with people, oftentimes you have to paint in broad strokes. And so those are the like the lowest level, where I've just got a few interesting hook ideas that hopefully will be memorable and can stick out in your mind, so that when when we go back to there, you can remember, oh, it's got these couple things going on there. Got it, right. A level above that are cultures like Herdaz and things like this, where I'm not probably going to have a main viewpoint character, but maybe some side characters who occasionally get viewpoints. And for those cultures, I'm digging deeper, right? I'm trying to make them not feel like World of Hats. And what I'm usually looking to do is have a couple of different characters from that culture. And we experience everything through the eyes of the characters in the books, and through the characters who come on stage from that culture. And so I try to usually present a contrast with those characters if I can. Some way that those two characters are going to show the depth of the culture by showing these are both individuals from this culture. And so this culture encompasses at least a broad enough tent to include these two very different people. And so the similarities between them are going to tell you, well, this is what this culture's may be about. Herdaz, its family is really important to them. As it is to many Earth cultures. They have these interesting things with their fingers that they can flick sparks with. What is that? What's up with that? They are a smaller nation beside a very large militaristic power. How is that influenced how they are? And I'm usually, in those cases, again, taking half our world influences and half trying to build fantastical influences. So the small country next to a large power, I'm using some of my experience in Korea, or some of my experience living in the United States and seeing, for instance, Mexico. One of the inspirations for Herdaz is some Mexican culture, basically that came from the idea of you are next to this very large superpower in the world. How do you interface and interact with it? And the same way maybe Korea interfaced with China and Japan, being kind of caught between these two major powers. And I just try to look for things like that and shape a culture. It is an ongoing process. Things start as World of Hat. They become, a little more in depth as you can introduce more characters and more ideas. And then, of course, the highest level is I'm going to introduce a character, named viewpoint character from this. And that character, usually I'm looking at how they are in contrast to their society. Like Kaladin being kind of in contrast with the small town he's from, both characterizes the small town and him by not really being in lockstep with it, because people often, every one of us, there's parts of our culture that we are in lockstep with, and a lot of parts that we conflict with. And that is how I build conflict between character and setting, and is a big part of my world building.
Yeah. Would you say writing those kinds of cultural differences and maybe even cultural clashes is difficult, or is it something that after you kind of get the culture set in your mind, it rather comes naturally?
It comes pretty naturally for me by this point, because I'm looking for friction points in any world building, any outline I'm doing. It's really the friction points that are defining where the story is evolving, where the places where people rub up against their culture and don't quite fit are usually more interesting than the ways that they align with their culture. Not always, but usually. And so I'm always on the watch for those. And as I'm building a story, as I'm building a culture, I'm trying to emphasize those as a way to help me. Like, one of the things you do as a writer is you often write your way into a story in a society. This is why I so often throw away the first chapter of a book. Even after doing all of this world building up front, it doesn't really come alive till you sit down and write it. I could have all the notes and things on the listener culture, the Parshendi, but until I started writing through Eshonai and Venli's viewpoints, and later on Relaine, that culture I didn't know if it would work, right? And when I wrote it, I had to make tweaks to make it work, to make it a place where there are multiple different individuals that all act differently, and yet share these common through lines. It's part of why I love to write, right? It's why I write fantasy, is because this is so much fun. This is exciting and interesting. But it is also the difficult part of writing fantasy, is getting these things across without boring the reader.
Yeah. And would you say some of your approach to some of you said, pulling from the hat approach, is some of it strategically kind of the glacier appeal, where it feels like there's a lot more below, but there's not really? Like, how much of that are you trying to worm in there?
Right. For those not in the know, I've often described, people describe the iceberg theory of world building, which is a nice description, where you want to have, just like most of the iceberg is theoretically hidden underneath the water, you want to hint at all of this underneath the water when you have a new culture that's only going to be on screen for a little bit of time. You want to hint there's this huge iceberg. And I always say to my students, I'm like, you don't have to build that whole iceberg. You probably shouldn't. You should learn the tricks to make it appear like there's a huge iceberg there, but in reality, you have this very hollow iceberg that you haven't done all this work. You've just evoked the feeling, particularly for those cultures that you're not going to go to very often. This will give you hooks and tools for when you go there to expand and make their story more deep, their culture more deep. But if you tried to build all of that, number one, it would take you 20 years to write a book. And number two, you would probably be tempted to stick it all in, which will turn your book into an encyclopedia entry instead of a story.
You'll end up with a whole Silmarillion that you have to somehow work in.
Yeah. Your children will have to spend years after your death putting together your papers and releasing them.
But now that you've reached, 4 books in on Rhythm of War, that glacier must be a bit more filled out by this point, at least in the notes end.
Yeah. Well, and it also is different depending on the series, right? Like Warbreaker, the glacier is much more hollow. I knew it was going to be 1 volume. I knew a couple things I needed to spend a lot of time on, and then I left the rest as hints about the world to pick up later on if I wanted to. Stormlight is a special case, because I knew I wanted to do a 10-book series. I knew it was going to be huge. I knew each volume was going to be huge, and I allowed myself to do a lot of extra world building up front. And by that point in my career, I knew to not throw it all at people. It was still, I still failed at writing the book the first time because I tried to put too much in. And in trying to put too much in, I ended up with only fractions of pieces of stories rather than a cohesive story. That's Way of Kings Prime that I released for free this summer so people can see. So it still took me years of practice to be able to do this. But I did do a lot more world building up front for that than I've done for any other series. Hundreds of thousands of words of world building just to have it because I knew I would use it.
Yeah, that sounds good. And so when it comes to specifically, you're talking about like, okay, you had 10 books for the Stormlight Archive. Was that a limit you put on yourself because you knew it could go to 20, or it just happened after you structured out the story, 10 was what fit?
Yeah, so 10 was the kind of the number. Various worlds in the Cosmere have this little number motif, right, going on with them, and I was building 10 in as a number motif as well as 9. 9 and 10, and the contrast between these two very similar but very, very different numbers. And in the original outline, numerology was a much bigger deal, actually. In the Stormlight, I was working a lot on the idea that I was using a language. Hebrew is a good example where every word can also be a number, and so you can have all sorts of funky numerology things. It comes up now and then in the published books with with various sketchy individuals will be into numerology. But I knew I wanted a big series. And I knew I had 10 characters, and I thought 10 books, 10 orders of Knights Radiant, 10 characters. It just fit really well, even with the first book being a disaster of me trying to do. Basically, I didn't do all 10, but I tried to do 5 or 6 of those stories concurrently, and it didn't end up working, and I had to approach it later. But I knew I was shooting for something like that, something big, and 10 felt like the right number after I did my real outline for it back in 2009. I felt like I had the material for that, and it was too poetically appropriate for the series to not do it as 10.
Okay, I like that. That's fair. And the last question I'll get to from the previously sent in, are there still 6 different types of Aethers in current canon, or has that changed?
They have expanded. Okay. So I'm using the Aethers behind the scenes for a lot of space age things. And because I'm doing that, I am adding in a few more Aethers. I still want it to be, there's going to be some limits on this, but I'm tweaking which Aethers I'm actually making because some of them didn't work as well as other ones and things like that. So there will end up being more, but I won't canonize the number until I have the Aether book ready to release.
And that is the smart choice.
Yeah.
So we have ones coming in now live from the Q&A, and I love this first question we got. What would you say a spoiler spren looks like?
Spoiler spren? Ooh, I don't know. Maybe it could randomly be particles of dust that just randomly form the words or the letters RAFO. They don't know what it means. It's just complete coincidence that they align that way, but it just happens.
Okay. And, are there thousands of more spren that you have planned out and know what they look like? Or are those just kind of, as you're writing them in the moment, this is what the spren's going to look like?
No, at this point, we've gotten through all the ones that I pre-planned. And at this point, I toss new ones in now and then. Usually, I only do that in large measure if we've gone to a new location because you have seen the spren that inhabit the area of the Shattered Plains in Shadesmar. But there can be a motion spren. Like I'm doing Osprey more often in the new book, and I added a new one. I'm trying to remember what it was, but there's a new one in this book. But everyone's, it or Etheru or things like that. Different place. You can attract different types of emotion spren, different Shadesmar ecology.
Fair enough. I do want to note for the audience, just for some of the questions, I am going to avoid spoilers for Stormlight Archive up to Rhythm of War. So some of the questions I want to curve there.
Yeah,
But a great question.
circumlocute those questions so that they don't turn into spoilers.
There we go. But a wonderful question we have here is, do you have any specific inspirations for span reads?
So span raids. So they're like most things in my books. You can ask me what my writerly inspiration is and what my kind of world building inspiration is. And let me explain that. Writerly inspiration for span raids is me acknowledging that I wanted to have a society that acted more like a post-industrial revolution society, or very close to it, than a medieval society. And there's lots of ways to do this. Like, fantasy worlds do not have to have progressed socially the same way that we progressed. Like, a lot of people want to tie technology to social progression or things like that, which you don't have to do, right? You don't necessarily have to say people from the Industrial Revolution in our world acted this way. Therefore, people in this world, you just don't have to do that. But there are certain technological revolutions that happen that do form a basis for some of these things. For instance, trade was very essential to kind of the expanding political entity that was a world economy, right? You needed people to at least be traveling consistently to Asia before that could happen. And I really think a lot of what makes people act the way we do, perhaps in some of our societies, is this kind of mass communication. I didn't want to be there yet, but I wanted to give a way that news and ideas could travel around the world in a consistent way on Roshar, to make the continent feel like a single entity, because otherwise I would probably have to tell the story as not a worldwide story. You just can't travel, and ideas can't move fast enough. Even if you look back at Roman times, like the Roman times took place in a fairly small geographical area. And even that, it was really hard for them to know what was happening. And you would have to spend months and months getting information that was then months and months out of date. And there's a lot of sitting around and waiting in those cultures for things to happen, even with having the Mediterranean to sail around and to bring this information. I just wanted information to move faster, both culturally and narratively. And so I said, I've got to find a way to do this. I did it with Sions and Elantris. I need to find a way to do something similar to that on Roshar. Real world inspiration, if there is one, is an autopen. Where, authors can have a little machine sign books for them and things like that, and it moves on its own. I've never used one, but politicians use them quite a bit. When you get that hand-signed letter, when you've donated whatever to whatever political party, that hand-signed letter was probably machine-signed with a real pen, rather than hand-signed by the individual.
That works. And a question I really like here is, you've done quite a remarkable job, I would say, of making a lot of your fans into Cosmere conspiracy theorists, people who will put up all kinds of stuff on the wall and try and draw connections. It's a great balance. And how did you develop your style of inspiring a inquisitive feeling among the fan base? How do you know how to lead people on enough, drop hints here and there? When is it too much? When is it not enough?
Boy, I'm not sure that I'm an expert in this. I've just kind of gone along with what's felt right. I mean, there are certain things that I do. I've talked before about my philosophy on fractal world building. You probably heard me talk about this, but in case people haven't, I like world building for books, where if you see it from a distance, from a casual reader's viewpoint, it looks interesting. But it is grokkable, to use fantasy terminology. Like, I can understand what that means. I get it. Broad strokes, understand. I'm not lost. But then, like a fractal, the closer you look, the more detailed it becomes and the more questions arise. That's what feels like really good world building to me. World building that is not off-putting to the casual reader, but has depth for the fan who really, really wants to dig deeply into it. And the origins of me doing this, or the first things I did this, was embedding things like Hoid and Cosmere hints, right? That these worlds were connected. And kind of embedding some characters I knew I was going to use later, that then when they showed up later, Vasher, great, right? Good example. I put him into Way of Kings Prime, knowing I'd eventually write his book. These sorts of things were the foundation of this. But the idea is that I want people to be able to look closely and have it not completely break down for them. One of the ways you achieve this as an author, I think, is by using beta readers to help you get the details right about things you don't understand as well as you could, so that the things that are authentic to real life bear the scrutiny, which lets the things that are fantastical, I think, have a weight of authority behind them as well, if that makes any sort of sense. But really, it's also about being a bit of a showman. Being a writer is, like I often say, being a magician on stage, where you are purposely and deliberately distracting people from the things that, if they pay too much attention to, might ruin the magic. But for the really in-depth, they like watching how the trick was done, even if they know. But it is a balance. Every book I release, there's a balancing act to make sure that there are things that people are expecting because they're well foreshadowed and just kind of satisfying events, and twists and turns that they're not quite expecting. And having a full spectrum of that, and particularly every book like the Stormlight Archive, so you know you can go in and you can legitimately guess what's going to happen, and you can be right, but you're probably not going to guess all of it. That's where I like to reside.
Okay. And, kind of in a similar vein, has there been something you've decided to put in that inadvertently has pigeonholed you in a way where it's like, oh, that element should, like, basically any regrets in terms of world building that now in hindsight, that was a little too solid, something you wish you had left a little looser?
What I think one of my big worries used to, or for a long time, was in the White Sand books. I made a bunch of mistakes there because, it was the first world I ever built. And so the magic system in that, there's some really cool things about it. There's some very non-cohesive things. I had people have the ability to turn sand into water for no good reason that does not fit the Cosmere magic system as it developed. And like that one's just kind of, I'm like, why did I even put that in? And I think I can't remember if we got that cut out or not. It was in the early drafts of the White Sand graphic novel scripts, but I remember trying to cut that out, and I can't now remember if we got it cut out. It might have been too integral to the or integral to the story, but regardless, there's things like that that I'm like, I wish I, at the end of the Mistborn trilogy, had been more clear about how many metals there were left to discover. That's definitely a mistake. But I just went ahead and was like, you know what? I made the mistake. I'm just going to explain it after the fact that, I made a mistake. And we're doing it the way I intended to be rather than the way it came across. And I'm okay copying the mistakes. And letting people know. One of the things I keep wanting to do is have Peter, every time a book comes out, release a notes file that's kind of like, how you, when a video game gets update, you have the bug fixes and power rebalances. I want to release a bug fixes and power rebalances thing for this. We're like, you know what? This little aspect of the world just never made sense. We have retconned this out. Now you can understand this is, stuff like that. I feel like we should be doing that. Way of Kings is a great example. Way of Kings ended up using more Earth metaphors than the rest of the Stormlight Archive, right? If you read Way of Kings, there's more references to grapes. There's more references to ravens because I just was not into the world as well, even after doing all this world building, as I eventually got into it. I'm like, they wouldn't use a raven metaphor here. They wouldn't say something looks like a flock of ravens. They just, they don't see ravens. And finally, I said to Peter, I'm like, go ahead and bug patch these out of Way of Kings for the newest version. Stuff like that. Yeah, I see in the chat, flock of chickens. Should be a flock of chickens. Well, it really should, be debris flying in front of a storm, right? Something that they have seen a lot, that it becomes a natural metaphor for their language. Not even a flock of chickens, because they don't see a flock of chickens. So,
Well, the more metals in Mistborn for me felt scientific. It just felt like scientific discovery to me. Oh, okay, there was more. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
So couldn't tell on the other end. But now, have there been any ideas or anything that you've actually been inspired from the fan base for? Which is a question we've had here that I'm curious to see. Is there anything that you've read in a thread and went, oh?
It's honestly hard to say sometimes, because I do read these things. And like the beta readers inspire a lot. There are lots of little tweaks I make because of them, and they're part of the fandom, right? I don't spend a lot of time reading fan theories. I keep an eye on them in broad strokes to see what people are guessing and what they're not guessing. But, when I worked on the Wheel of Time, one of the things I realized I had to be very careful on was book fan service. This is not like anime fan service or whatever. Book fan service is when you bring back, like the big thing in Wheel of Time is people were like, are you going to bring back Narg, the talking Trolloc from the first book? And there was no way to bring back Narg that would not completely destroy the sense of immersion in the book. But there's, at the same time, there's a line to walk where it's like, bringing back a favorite character that makes sense to bring back and have a cameo here is in some ways doing fan service also, but it's at the same time, part of what I love about the Wheel of Time is that these characters, you occasionally see them again and things like that. And having a character from, Dawnshard, whose appearance in Dawnshard in the prologue was a character that people love from Way of Kings. Like, these are fan servicey moments. They come back because I know fans like them. So yes, fans influence, but I also think it's natural and part of the storytelling process is kind of reincorporate these things. So there's a balance there.
Okay. We have a self-described, very nerdy question here I'd love to get your take on. Have you ever considered the energy density of Stormlight compared to real-world substances, example, nuclear fuels? Is it kind of on that level?
So one of the things, I have a little group of Cosmere-nauts, we should say, fans from of the books that I've known for a long time, who are themselves physicists. And I have asked them to start helping me quantify these things. Right now, I don't have them exactly quantified. The place we're starting with is which forms of vestiture in the Cosmere, how much fantastical unit of energy do they have, and how does that relate to a real world jewel or something like that? And that's something we're in the process of doing, because we'll need it by space age Cosmere. So, but I've told them they have years to figure it out.
Okay, that works. I mean, there's been some stuff I've seen, like the energy required to have a lightsaber actually work would just be unreal.
Yes.
So I'm wondering how we're walking those lines in the Cosmere.
Well, the nice thing is, by having the Cosmere, in our world, you have conservation of energy, right? And I've talked about this in the Cosmere, because we can go from energy to matter to investiture, and any of the three can transfer between. We can pop energy out in interesting ways to fuel things if we need to. You can draw directly from the spiritual realm, or you can have some of this matter transferred into energy through becoming a vestiture first, in a way that's a little less explosive than normally getting energy out of matter is in our world. And so that said, the magic system of Dragonsteel, which I wrote long ago, which is not released, one of the primary magic systems of that was actual nuclear physics, and nuclear fission was part of the magic system. Being able to see the atoms and manipulate them. I don't know if I'll ever do that in actual Cosmere, but it was one of the Cosmere magics originally. So when you read Dragonsteel, we'll probably release it with sometime around the Words of Radiance leather-bound Kickstarter would be my guess. You can read about people seeing, they call them in the Cosmere terms, they're called axi or axons, an axon or axi for plural, rather than atoms. But you can see people playing with that. And I even think there are rumors in the books of people playing with those to the point that they make enormous explosions that cause wastelands, because you do something a little wrong and suddenly you're splitting some atoms, and that can be very bad. That can have ramifications.
I love the follow through of logic, and I know there's fans who are just looking at the chat. Very happy to hear that could finally be released, be coming. We had a question here from Gabby who asked, do you have time to read a lot currently? And if so, what are you enjoying reading?
So currently, I finished Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, which is his book coming out in May. I don't know how many of you guys enjoyed The Martian or Artemis, but I love Andy Weir's writing, and the new one is just incredible. You should try to get an arc of that if you can, Daniel. If you like the Martian, this book is great. I loved it. Had a lot of the same feel of as the Martian, but more science fiction-y. A little less near future and a little more like kind of classic hard science fiction. And I just really liked it. It's I'll release a review of it and maybe a video about it when it comes out, just because I think it's one of these rare, like The Martian, hard science fiction books that you can give to your mom, who doesn't read a lot of science fiction, and she will love also. Like that's the sort of book it is. And I love that Andy Weir is doing this, right? These very approachable and accessible hard science fiction novels. Like I haven't seen books like that. I'm not even sure ever, right? Because I could say Asimov's very approachable, but was Asimov hard science fiction? That's debatable, right? And while I enjoy Clark, I don't feel like Clark is really approachable, right? Or Kim Stanley is that Kim Stanley Robinson? The Red Mars author. Those are really good, but very hard on the hard science, and can be a little unapproachable. And so that's what I have read most recently.
Okay,
I finished that about 2 weeks ago. So I've now got another book on my stand to read.
Out of pure curiosity for myself, I loved The Martian and I loved the movie. Were you a fan of the movie as well?
Yeah, I really did. It's one of those movies that it adapted really well. For a strangely epistolary book, like epistolary books don't tend to make great movies always, but it worked real well. And I still prefer the book, I think, but the movie was great. It's like Ridley Scott can be really good when Ridley Scott is good. And when Ridley Scott is bad, he's still good. He's just weird, right? And yes. So it's like I haven't seen a Ridley Scott movie that I disliked. But sometimes he's really got his finger on the pulse of storytelling for the nation, and he can do things like Gladiator and stuff like that. And sometimes it's just like, woo, we're off in Prometheus land. All right.
Yeah, I can still enjoy those. I'm left with a lot of questions, and then he'll do his Blade Runner controversy where it's like, what are you doing here?
What are you doing, man? But yeah.
Well, we have a rather fun question here again. What Knights Radiant Order are you? Did you take the quiz?
So I got Bondsmith, Elscaller as my two highest, which were the places I would have put myself. So it worked for me.
And if you could choose, were those the ones you would choose?
Yeah, well, if I could choose, I always say that flying is like my superpower I'd most like to have, which you can kind of tell by reading my series that pops up now and again. Weird sorts of flying. And so I would probably want to be a Windrunner, probably maybe a Skybreaker based on power set. But I don't think I'm naturally Windrunner or Skybreaker.
And if you could have any Cosmere power, which one would you like to grab?
Well, it depends on if I get access to the fuel, right? Like if I were going to pick Windrunner and there was no Stormlight, then Yeah. So I usually say Mistborn on this one, just because assuming I can use the metal as fuel, it'd be very easy to come by in our world. And it's really fun to be in the modern, world full of metal as a Mistborn, I think. But
okay, we have a question
that's
from
not the
Ryan.
smart answer. The smart answer should be something, that keeps me immortal or something like that.
I've always been partial to, hey, I can live forever, so that's the way to go. Question from Ryan here. Like how bondsmiths have stronger versions of their surges, is it possible to have stronger versions of the other surges as well?
Yes, this is what happened to Ashen. And so you can have some very dangerous manipulation of surges.
Okay. And then I believe this is one that might result in a read and find out, but could a radiant ever belong to multiple orders?
You actually, I've answered this. I answered this, I think, last night. And so I have to not RAFO it because I gave someone else the answer. The answer is that this is theoretically possible, but it was not done in the past.
Okay.
It's just not a thing that you did. It was not kosher. It was not, but it is theoretically possible.
It's falling into that, okay, conspiracy theory time for the fans, let's go type answer.
Yeah. I mean, you'd have to find Spren that had volition, and you would have to convince multiple demigods to be okay with this, right?
So someone with very high charisma would have
yeah. You have to pass some pretty good charisma rolls, charisma checks to make that happen. But I mean, the fact that you can be a Knight Radiant and you could pick up one of the Honor Blades and have access to those surges, I mean, there's an easier way to do it in that case, if you consider getting a hold of one of the Honor Blades to be easy. But it is theoretically possible to have something like that happen.
And so this is another one from Amy for the magic questions, if we're having a theme here right now. Could a Windrunner fly into space?
Yeah, it actually wouldn't be that hard because Windrunners can control pressure also. And as long as you have Stormlight, you don't have to breathe. It's harder for a Skybreaker. Windrunner, as long as you run out of Stormlight, I mean, you could travel between planets as a Windrunner if you had enough Stormlight. Wouldn't be too difficult. Kaladin could probably do it.
Okay. And we have a rather unrelated question, but I'm curious myself from Josh. What TV series during lockdown have caught your eye?
So like a lot of the world, we're watching The Mandalorian because it is just perfectly targeted at my family, with having 3 little boys from 8 to 13. Like the 8-year-old has his Baby Yoda toy plush that he brings down to watch Baby Yoda with us. And so we're watching The Mandalorian. We usually watch them on Monday nights rather than the Friday night because I have writing group on Fridays. We watched through The Good Place season 4. I actually have a video essay about that at some point we'll record. I wrote it up just about the finale to The Good Place. I thought there were some interesting things to talk about because philosophy and whatnot is fun for me to chat about. Otherwise, I prefer generally cinema to television, right? I do like this kind of golden age of television we're in where there are 8-hour-long movies that you can watch and things like that. And so the escaping the bounds of network television, I think is a very good thing. But the things I've been watching with my family are those 2.
See, I completely agree. I just finished Queen's Gambit, and to me, it just felt like a movie. Like it was just absolutely a movie all the way through, and I love that.
Stranger Things is like that, right? It feels like an 8-hour movie, and it's great because you can have pacing like in a novel in a cinematic form, which you really couldn't have because network television is not paced like a novel. Network television is paced like a bunch of very short stories that could be read in any order, which is not like epic storytelling. It's kind of the opposite of epic storytelling. And that was a requirement on a lot of network television. I do want to go back and at some point watch a bunch of Next Generation, because I just haven't done it since I was a teenager. And my wife, she watched it. Like, she and I didn't know each other back then, but we were both watching the screen at the same time every week, watching Next Generation. And if you're going to do episodic, I think, I probably won't watch the whole thing. I'll go and look on the IMDb user ratings and pick, the 5 highest episodes for each season and watch those. Because there are some stinkers that happen in
Season
any
1.
television. Season 1, it's hard to find the gems in season 1. But, once Riker gets a beard, things get better.
You've made your affinity for Deep Space Nine known. I've accepted that.
Yes.
I've moved on.
Have you not watched Deep Space Nine?
Since I was very young, so I need to give it another go.
Yeah, man, because Deep Space Nine tried so hard to have a continuing story and an epic storyline, and that's just the type of storytelling I like. And so when Deep Space Nine was doing that, they actually have on the DVDs, you can listen to the director's commentary where they're like, we would take these goofy Ferengi episodes and show them to the studio execs to make them think that we were doing just episodic television, and then try to tell this epic story with continuing plot lines through multiple episodes on the parts of the season they didn't see. And that clicked with me in my late teens, early 20s, just how well that came together. And I really liked Deep Space Nine and still do. But my wife never watched it, so I'm trying to convince her to watch that through with me, at least the continuing storyline episodes.
As many of the great sci-fi authors back in the day for original Star Trek came in and wrote an episode, if you were asked to write an episode for Star Trek now, would you do it?
The new Star Trek, probably, I don't know. I like the new Star Trek. Like, I am really wary of watching Picard because I am worried that what I want out of Picard is not what I'm going to get out of Picard. Because while Discovery is fine, it's not giving me what I always loved about Star Trek, and I feel like Picard's going to be the same way. So maybe I would, but more likely is that, if I were ever wanting to do that, I would write some of my own stories that are, set in my universe that tried to do some of the same things.
I'm getting totally off tangent on Star Trek here. Sorry, if someone brings it up, I'm going to run down that hole. But getting back to some fan questions here, we have one. If you could have 2 characters from any book you've written meet and have an experience or something together, is there any 2 that stand out as you'd love to write a novella with them?
If I really want to do it, I would probably find a way to do it. Maybe not necessarily. Like, there are too many firewalls between the worlds at this point to segregate them. And so, and I often joke that it's like, hey, we put Wayne and Lift on an adventure together. But I feel like that actually wouldn't read well because there are characters that read better. It's like an entire crew of Captain Jack Sparrows is not going to be a good movie, right? And there are certain characters that are built to play off of other characters. Wax and Wayne are a great example, right? That duo is more interesting together than either of them would be apart. And I tried to write the books starting with Wayne. Wayne was the first one developed, and it was just too goofy. Having a Wayne viewpoint in every book where you can kind of be like, wow, Wayne is just kind of an interesting dude. Works. It's great. It adds a lot of flavor and color to a story, and I can do some interesting things with his viewpoint. But having too many characters like that, so the answer would be I probably wouldn't do that. And so I don't know what I would do. I joke that that's what I would do, but I actually wouldn't.
Well, you have access to the Wheel of Time as well, but I understand the firewalls there are probably even greater.
Yeah, I mean, I did write Kelsier and Moiraine hanging out once, right? Have you ever read that?
I have not. That has not been pushed across my desk.
I think it was during one of the cage matches that they used to run on Del Rey's site with Sean Speakman, who was the editor on that. And they asked me to do a little scene, for that, just for fun. And I did a couple of those, a couple different years. And one of them that I wrote up was Kelsier and Moiraine interacting. It involved a lot of I Got Better, Monty Python-esque sort of jokes.
Those are always little fun tangents to be able to just go off to the side and have fun with something that's not fully taken seriously related canon.
Yeah, I'm sure that's somewhere on the internet. You guys can go read.
If it's on the internet, it's still on the internet. That's the rule of how it goes. Well, we're getting a little close to wrapping up time here, but I wanted to get back more towards Rhythm of War specifically. This has been, it's the second to last installment to this first leg of the Stormlight Archive. Is there anything you would like to say to the fans in terms of like getting ready, what to expect? What is here is what the Rhythm of War is to them?
Boy, it's tough because I don't want to spoil anything for people who aren't on the fourth book yet, right? Like, I have to be very careful. And if I haven't ahead of time said spoilers up to this book, so I'll try, but I'll have to talk around any spoiler things. This is Venli and Eshonai's book. I did a dual flashback for them. It is the penultimate book. There are some things I'm doing because of that are having some interesting pacing and plotting going on to prepare for the penultimate book of the first sequence. But mostly, read and have fun. I hope you guys enjoy it. You already know, like, if you are going to read this book, right? Because you will have read the first ones. And the people who aren't going to read this book probably dropped out in the first book. Probably put them off. So I don't know. Enjoy the book. I hope you guys enjoy it. That's all I'll say. Like, it's really hard with Stormlight to give any sort of summaries because there are so many different things I'm doing. Basically, this is the series that the pitch is, do you trust me? If you do, try the books and read them. So I hope that you guys trust me and enjoy the books.
As someone who tried to do an Oathbringer summary recently, it is difficult.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again so much for being here and answering so many questions for the fans and all of this. And I just want to say thank you everyone showing up as well. This is being published in the UK by Gollingzank, and apparently you can pick it up at any Waterstone for you guys. And I just want to say again, thank you, Brandon.
Thumbs up to Waterstones. Let me just say, I love touring the UK. I love going to those Waterstones bookstores. They have some of my favorite events, and I was going to be in the UK next week when we planned this all out back when we all lived in a different world. And I'm very sad to not get to the UK. That was the part I was looking forward to. My wife was going to go, and we were going to go see Hamilton. And that's just not happening. And so, if you live in London, hit Chinatown for me and eat some xiaolongbao. And I will have to see you another year. But thank you to Galance and thank you to Waterstones. They just take good care of me. I'm glad that there is such a good, thriving bookstore culture in the UK. And I'll see you guys in a future year.